Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here. If you don't hear me well, please wave or something. I'm also not great with my voice being loud, so please tell me if you don't hear me well. Maybe a bit louder? Okay. But thanks so much for being here. So the title is How My Grandma's Locked Away Teacup Made Me Wonder About Women's Objectification in Polish Pottery Context. And that comes from the fact that I studied my bachelor's here at Minerva, and then I did my master's in Den Bosch, and I always worked with ceramics. However, I was always working with ceramics in the Dutch workshops, and I never actually questioned my own country's histories, or how do women especially work in workshops. And only because of this that we have here, mapping Eastern European design histories, I actually started wondering how those artifacts around me, how were they made, or who made them. So these are the two cups that I have researched, and interestingly enough, I got them from my grandma from her basement, and she has no memory whatsoever how were they, how did they find their way into her possession. Also, side note, the napkins that they're on, also my grandma made them, so I wanted to show that off as well. But I really had the initial trouble was to find out how were they made, or who made them, because it's not as simple with ceramics sometimes, because it's not that obvious. They don't have like a QR code that you can scan and know who made them exactly. So that was the start of the journey for me. Oh, okay, this one is a little bit in the way, but okay. So there are I came with two assumptions about ceramics. First, I knew ceramics from a more traditional context, like for example in ancient Greece or in Japan, where ceramics is really celebrated as fine arts. And because of that, because they're being celebrated as fine arts, women were usually not allowed in the workshops, because they were not considered worthy of working with fine arts at the time. Of course, this is not true. Women were working with ceramics at the time, but the history basically erased them. And it's very hard to find any very famous female ceramists from that countries. And then in the Western context, it was considered that that ceramics is a heavy, very of art, especially with the introduction of the ceramic wheel, that you have to sit on it, and it either spins, and you have like 2 kilos of clay, and it is heavy on your form. That's why it was mostly then male occupied craft. And again, women were not therefore welcomed in the workshops. I kind of assumed the same for Polish ceramics, because this is what I knew. And this research really proved me wrong, and I'm very happy that it proved me wrong. But I want to show you that I came with my assumptions, and then the research actually, showed me otherwise. So I started my research by looking at the bottom of the cup, and you can see the small logo MI. In ceramics, it's called a signature of the ceramics workshop of ceramics factory. I've managed to find it going through a lot of archives of logos, of signatures, and to my surprise, it turned out that it's made by Mirosławickie Zakłady Ceramiczne. You could see at the bottom, at the top. But this factory is no longer producing. In the 80s, they closed. They were active in the 50s, but then they were mostly producing bricks because they wanted to rebuild Poland after Second World War. And at the time, all factories were nationalized, so it was very hard for any factory whatsoever to have any agency over what do they want to produce. So basically the government was telling, this factory in this area has to produce only bricks. So they were, until around 60s, 70s, when they started producing beautiful ceramics. And this is how, somehow these ceramics found their way into my grandma's hands. This one specifically, it's called Zośka bez ucha. and that means naughty Sophia without an ear. And Zośka, yeah, I translated into naughty Sophia because it's in Poland, you could, depending on what is your emotion towards a person, you call them a little bit differently. So my name is Maria, but no one will call me that. Everyone will call me Marysia because everyone likes me. But then if someone is angry at me, they would call me Maryśka. So depending on the emotion you have towards a person, they change your name a little bit. So here there's a naughty Zośka without an ear, and of course without an ear means without a handle. And underneath there are photographs of other of the same form of the cup with other glazing, if you're curious. But with that, I really was wondering, why is it named after a woman that without an ear? I managed to actually reach out to the person who created the website. It actually turns out to be basically a person who collects all the pieces, and their parents used to work in the factory. So this person actually told me that the cup was actually named after one of the employees in the ceramic factory, after Mrs. Zofia Grajcar. When I inquired to maybe have an interview, or if they would be willing to talk with me, and I especially mentioned that I am interested in talking about women in those factories, somehow the conversation didn't go on. And then, funny enough, a few days later, I noticed on the website that the person created an article about women in their factory. I like to believe that maybe somehow the paths crossed in that sense. Maybe they were already planning on writing an article like this, and then I approached them. I don't know, this way or the other, now the article is there, so I'm very happy to. It's a little bit of a pity that I didn't manage to connect with them to actually have the conversation. But from the little bit of a talk that we did have, and also on the information on the website, I was able to find that there were women working and production line in the factories. There was never a woman director. There was never a woman vice director. But there were women especially occupying the workspaces like glazing, stamping, or painting, because these are considered more womanly techniques. Women was never allowed to form the shape of the cup, but they were able to put their decorative skills on top. But there were head departments that were women, because as it says on the website, that these required more soft skills, and women are good with that. That's why the head departments were women, but these are also head departments of the glazing painting department. But here you can already see, compared to the Western culture, in Poland, we were more free with women being allowed in the workspaces. Oh, sorry that there's this in front of it and I don't see my mouse. I really cannot take it away. But I still continued my search for Mrs. Zofia Grajcar, for the woman that the name was named after, and I couldn't find her. But on the archive photographs, I could find other women called also Grajcar, and I assume that these may be her mom or grandma or sisters. Especially looking at the photos, you could assume that there's a generations passing, since the first photo is very old, still from the times that they were producing the bricks. So it's really interesting to see that there are most likely people, really generations, working in those factories. But for that, I also contacted Maria Wołejko. I had an interview with her. And she was a daughter of the head of the department of Chodzież, of the painting department of Chodzież. This is also a very famous Polish ceramic factory. And she confirmed that it was the case. If you're born in this city, and this city is very well known for making ceramics, most likely your grandma worked here, your father worked here, now it's your turn. It's not like you're doing it with a passion. It's just something that you do because you were born in this specific area. I will see if also works.
Cegiernia cegły atletycznej, że tak powiem, że one w ogóle nie produkowały żadnych. Jak wyprodukowali i zdecydowały się kiedyś, tutaj jeszcze dobrze pamiętam, na wystawę w Poznaniu, targi międzynarodowe zrobiły tak.
Okay, so this was a small piece of our conversation with Maria Wołejko. I was very nervous before the conversation because she has a huge knowledge. She's really an amazing person, but she's very dominant in what she's saying. And I was very scared of saying something silly and her correcting me. And she did it very many times throughout the conversation. But thanks to that, I really was able to expand my research not only in what's written in the books, because this is, as we see more and more, erases some histories, but thanks to the dialogues, yeah, I could have a personal experience in my research, and I really appreciated that. But Maria Wołejko really mentioned that there were women, of course, in the workspaces, but there was a very strict hierarchy still. So there was a lot of and mostly the roles of the directors or vice directors were occupied by men who had their networks in the politics, because this is how communism works. And all the factories were nationalized. There was no privatization of the industry, and that's why it was very easy to put the right person on the right in the right place. So this is very important to know when talking about this context. Yeah, but going back to Vezośka without an ear, I was very still curious, why was the tema called after a factory employee? Because I would then assume that there would be some sort of article about it, why there's a person connected to this cup. I couldn't find anything. What I am taking out of it is I'm wondering if it was a action of showing someone respect, or if it's something maybe more noticing similarities in the physique of Mrs. Zofia Graincar to the cup, because this is how in Poland that there's such a very much gendered language. We always refer to ceramics as a female form. That comes from the word glina. That means the clay. It's always female. So it turns out that if you look at the language that we even associate with ceramics, we are always using very female associated words. Like we can say that the cup is, or the vase is curvy, cute, rounded, full, playful, delicate, bubbly, seductive, and fragile. And I do worry that these do create the dangers of seeing women as the cups, or that's a very straightforward comparison, but really being very fast on comparing a woman's body to a vessel. That can also be shown through the fact do call specific parts of the ceramics with the body parts. Like, for example, would say an ear or a neck or belly or feet of the vase. And I am thinking that such categorization may really put us in the box where it's very hard to escape perceiving a woman's body as a vessel or on the basis of utility. And here is a poem by Dariusz Osiński that I quickly translated in Google Translator. But there's an entire book of poems that he writes. He's a potter, and he also writes poems about clay, and it's very vague if he talks about his love to a certain woman or to love about clay. And I think there's interesting that this boundary is somehow erased. So for example, this poem says, desire, mold my thoughts, mold your word enough. I would like to mold your body. That also shows the control that somehow a man then carries over the woman's body as he sees it as a pot. So summing up, comparing to ancient Greece or Japan, where the art of ceramics was so celebrated, in Poland it was quite insignificant. We were more interested in creating bricks or building material to renew the country after Second World War. And in Poland, it was just a vessel that was needed to have on your table. So it was really not any special craft. So you could see a lot of pottery workshops actually happened in the villages and in someone's houses, just because someone was able to find a good source of soil, of good source of clay. They started to create those, and these were always generations of people working. But because its insignificance, then women were working with no troubles together with men at these stations. And so it is a blessing and a curse in some way. A blessing meaning that women were very much were a huge part of the craft, but a curse meaning that that ceramics was never really celebrated in Poland to start with. The case was a little bit different in art schools. Whenever we started having art academies, the first were in Warsaw, Poznań, and Kraków. If you're ever visiting Poland, I will always suggest to go to Kraków. This is the most beautiful city. I'm from Poznań, but it's mid. I would say that many women graduated with ceramics major, and that was quite incredible because not in many countries women were able to finish art schools, let alone also were welcomed into ceramic workshops. In Poland, it was even a case that the head of the departments were also women. You could see here, the person that's behind the behind the Zoom thing. That's Irena Lipowska, and she was the first head department for the design and arts in Art Academy in Warsaw. And here I wanted just to give a quick shout out to these amazing artists, women artists, ceramicists like Irena Lipowska-Zworska or Krystyna Cybińska, who were escaping this traditional form of pottery making, and they really believed in the ceramics should be considered fine arts. It shouldn't be considered just on a utilitarian basis, and they were really fighting their way through also departments like painting or sculpture to really show that it is very significant. And they organized a lot of competitions in Poland that were national and international. And only then did ceramics started to gain appreciation in Poland once the Italians noticed us, once the English people noticed us. This is when Polish people start to be more and more proud of their own creations. And I'm just very much inspired by these people, also especially seeing that they're all creating still till this day, and till this day they have their solo exhibitions. And for me, that's a huge inspiration to also look into your own origins and think about the things that you're working with your mediums. Who were the people to make that path for you? Thank you so much.